All right. Good evening, everybody. Tonight we're going to look at a seminal event, and most would say during the Civil Rights Movement, but in American history. If you know anything about the Civil Rights Movement, what's one thing or one person we all know when we say Civil Rights Movement? Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and one more may be Rosa Parks, right? And this is the mainstream narrative. And knowing the mainstream narrative and what it missed, particularly about how American history systemically marginalizes those things that are very challenging. And right now, to this day, we have these arguments about multiple perspectives saying that we're learning from multiculturalism when every day there is a war going on about what can be said and can be taught in formal education. So to set the record straight, and that's for historical accuracy, for this idea of what we know as esoteric information, we have created a space that will permit for you all to, and depending upon your degree of acceptance, rethink the civil rights movement, rethink this idea of what Black Studies does to the ivory tower. And in more ways than one, I say for all of you all, think about it this way. Feel free to interrogate Mr. Long on his historical accuracy. That's why he's here. And another reason he's here, so that the youngest person in this room won't be capsided by these kinds of stories when they finally hear them, if they ever hear. We want to prepare them from the very beginning. So again, without any further ado, I want to introduce to you all Mr. Dale Long, who is a survivor of the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing in 1963 in Birmingham, Alabama. So please show him your love.
In early 1965, it was clear to Baldwin and many others in the movement they were facing an uphill battle to change the most entrenched minds.
Commissioner Connor, do you think that you can keep Birmingham in the present situation of segregation?
I may not be able to do it, but I'll die trying.
Especially in the American South.
We will register to vote because as citizens of these United States, we have the right to do it. Because they were rightfully issued.
What was needed was someone and something to cut through. And that came in the form of one extraordinary woman.
Alabama's got me so upset.
And one extraordinary song captured in this historic recording.
Everybody knows about Mississippi gone down.
On her mind when she wrote the song was the murder of the civil rights activist Medgar Evers in Mississippi. But the real trigger point was what had happened in Birmingham, Alabama. There on the 15th of September 1963, 4 girls were killed by a bomb at the 16th Street Baptist Church as they were getting ready for Sunday school. Followed later that afternoon by the shooting of 2 boys by members of the Klan.
6 kids were murdered in Birmingham on a Sunday and in Sunday school in a Christian nation, and nobody cares.
This was the location of the church library. And my Sunday school class met in this space.
One of the survivors of the church bombing that morning is Dale Long.
Sunday school was over, and we were just laughing and talking about boy stuff. And right in the midst of that, the building started to shake. The bookcase was about here, as I recall. Reeling back and forth from the percussion of the explosion that took place just a few feet over.
Piecing the story together in the rubble, you begin to know what Federal Judge Allgood meant when he said he could think of no greater heresy or a more blackening sin against humanity.
It left an 8-foot hole right here, and the latest bathroom was on the other side. And there were 5 girls there. 4 of them died, and the other one, her eyesight severely damaged. It was a terrible day. Addie, Denise, Cynthia, Carol were in the morgue. I think that's Mr. Pippin, who just collapsed in grief when he realized that that was his grandbaby in the rubble. My. These are difficult to look at sometimes.
Birmingham is probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. Its ugly record of brutality is widely known.
What had propelled Nina Simone into writing Mississippi Goddam was not a one-off.
There have been more unsolved bombings of Negro homes and churches in Birmingham than in any other city in the nation.
There were so many bombings in the city that residents began to call it not Birmingham, but Bombingham.
And this is the historical record. Adamant hatred.
This crucial time in our lives when everything is so desperate, when every day is a matter of survival, I don't think you can help but be involved. We will shape and mold this country, or it will not be molded and shaped at all anymore. So I don't think you have a choice. How can you be an artist and not reflect the times?
Film, won't you agree? The clip you just saw was riveting as well as poignant. It was an excerpt from a film that was done by Oxford Films. It was in celebration of the BBC's, British Broadcasting Company's 100th anniversary. And Simon Schumer was the guy who was doing the narration. He's an art historian, and I think he teaches at Columbia University. Well, he had his folk from Oxford to find me. If you Google Dale Long Birmingham, I'm all over the place. And they invited me to meet them in Birmingham. And I did the piece for them. And because of COVID, nothing happened for a while. And I got desperate. I went on the internet looking for it and finally found it. And I saw this guy walking down these steps. And I said, whoever that is, he walked just like me. And it was me. But anyway, thank you for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm from near Dallas, but again, I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, and I ended up in the Dallas area by way of Houston because I left Birmingham quick as I could. I was so sick of being there. I didn't think that was the worst place on earth, and I used to ask my folks, my mom, why do we live here? The things that we suffered as little kids were unbelievable. The segregation, the brutality that we saw, the bombings that took place over and over again. And I would overhear my parents talking about it. They knew exactly who was doing it. They knew exactly. Birmingham was an iron or steel city, and you had all of the dynamite right there that was readily available. And all of these guys who were in the Ku Klux Klan that were there to intimidate people, because if it was left up to them, segregation would continue over and over and over again because they wanted to keep it that way. Years after Brown versus Board of Education, that was in 1954, Birmingham was thoroughly segregated. And they didn't intend for anything to change about that. A few weeks ago, we would have celebrated Dr. King's 93rd birthday, I think. He would have been. Now, I often wondered, what would this country be if Dr. King was still around? What would this world be? Because he was such a, I admired that man so. I used to call it his oratorical genius and intellectual depth. I used to see him on TV all the time, and I would beg my mom to dad to let me go and demonstrate, but they never would let me go during the time when he was doing all of that, because they didn't know what to expect. You know, you were going to jail, the jails were overcrowded, and they didn't want that for their kids. But they were totally in lockstep with what Dr. King was trying to do in Birmingham. Birmingham was, as I said, very turbulent. And it was very rough on my parents to raise two boys. Imagine that. They couldn't keep their eyes on us all the time. And so we would see things on the way home from school. People throwing stuff out of the cars at us, calling us the N-word. You couldn't go to shop downtown Birmingham for clothes because Black folks weren't allowed to try on clothes. My mother used to tell us before we left, go to the bathroom. When we get there, don't ask to eat because there's nowhere else for us to eat. And please don't just pick up a hat and put it on because, you know, and that's what kids do. But if you did that, if you put it on, you had to buy it. Imagine the difficulty Ken and I had in dealing with something like that. We going to try on shoes and we see a little white boy right next to us trying them on, but we couldn't. Let me try it a different way. Let me try something different. In order, when my mom took Ken and I to buy shoes, she had to trace our feet on a piece of paper and hand this to the attendant that possessed Burger Philip Loveman's in order for them to determine our shoe size. All the time this is going on, we sitting there watching other kids get measured and try on shoes. Those are the things that we had to encounter. If there were water fountains, they had the colored water fountain that was never cleaned over in the corner, never chilled. And then there was the white water fountain. They didn't have to separate the dressing rooms because Black folks couldn't try on clothes anyway. And earlier today, Dr. Dixon talked about Plessy versus Ferguson. And you know, I went through all of high school and never peeped into a brand new microscope because we always had to take hand-me-downs from the white schools. I recall a high school in Birmingham, Ullman. The school colors were green and gray, and somebody told them they were getting brand new football equipment. But when it arrived, they realized that the equipment had been used by Ramsey High School for a number of years before it was passed down to Ullman. And so they had to spend the first few days spray painting the helmets green, to cover up the blue. But those kids took that equipment and they did tremendous work on the gridiron. The same as what we took the old microscopes and beakers and all of the equipment you would find in the chemistry lab or in the biology lab and did, because we had very dedicated, well-educated teachers who wanted us to be better than what they were. And I was so thankful to have them teaching me. The band situation was unbelievable. It led to a scholarship. I went to Texas Southern, didn't pay a dime to go to school because I was in the band, the best experience of my life. If I had to do it, I'd do it all over again because I had a good time in Texas Southern. But I had to wake up around my junior year and figure out, that's why I'm here. I got to get the education and go home and show the folks in Birmingham, this is what I did. So this included schools, and the schools was the big issue because we all know that Brown versus Board of Education was 1954, but this was in 1963, 62, 63 that I was talking about, and Birmingham was thoroughly segregated, and the schools were the main issues because they didn't want to deal with what they used to call race mixing. You would hear ridiculous stories when George Wallace and Asa Carter were running for governor. They claimed that Black folks had tails. Imagine that level of ignorance. You saw Bull Connor on the screen. He was an announcer for some baseball team. And then he turned politician and he was over the public service commission or something. That meant he was over fire and the fire department and the police department. But he was a hardcore segregationist. And the unofficial role he played, that he was the go-between between the business community in Birmingham and the Ku Klux Klan. And he did what they told him to do because, you know, you had a certain element in Birmingham that wanted to keep their hands clean of the violence and any association with the Ku Klux Klan. You know, earlier you were talking about reckless eyeballing, but there was another definition for that. And I'm gonna try and demonstrate it for you in here. Lauren, would you stand for me? Y'all pay close attention to this. Lauren, I really like that outfit you have. You have on a beautiful outfit, even though you're chewing. And your hair is gorgeous. Your outfit is just great. And I just couldn't help but say that. That simple statement from me, a black man, would have gotten me lynched. Graveyard Day in Birmingham. That's the way it was. Y'all remember Emmett Till, right? Money, Mississippi, 14-year-old came to work on the farm in the summer with his relatives and made a statement or allegedly whistled at a white woman downtown, and guess what? Killed him dead. They found him in the bottom of a river weeks later, and when the mother took him home to Chicago, she demanded that they have an open casket. Imagine how that boy looked sitting in the bottom of a river for months. She wanted the world to see what happened to her child. And in many respects, that can happen again. Today, 60 years later. Now, the bombings took place all over town, and it had to do with lines drawn. If you could live on this side of town, but you couldn't live on this side. So the line that separated was a street called Center Street, a big hill. And many of the quote unquote elite doctors and lawyers, black folks, lived on Center Street. But soon they changed the name from Center Street, which was the official name, to Dynamite Hill. And Dynamite Hill was about 3 blocks from where I lived. And whenever the bombings would take place, of course, we would feel the percussion and hear it, but we were taught what to do. My parents told us to get on the floor away from the windows and don't move until they told us to. Because many times there would be a second bomb, and that was designed, the first bomb was designed to draw people out of their home to see what was going on, but the second one was wrapped with shrapnel, bolts and nails and stuff that could really kill you. But people were smart enough to stay at home and not be victimized by that type of stuff. But the other part of it was there was no counseling for black boys and girls who had to deal with that type of stuff. You know, we have to revisit that. The first thing you hear when there's been some sort of incident at the school, mass shooting, you always hear them say, we're bringing in counselors. But the day after the bombing, it was business as usual. School was in place. We just had to live with it and struggle with the things that you know we were faced with in terms of our mental capabilities. My mom and dad tried the best they could to explain why bad things happen to good people. They talked about the civil rights movement. And again, we repeatedly asked them, why do we live here? Can't we just move, go somewhere else? To Texas? We didn't know. Or to Wyoming? You know, we begged them. And we kept asking the question, let's just pack up and leave. But that was easily said than done. But my parents never taught us hate. Oh, they told us to be fearful and prepared. It was you know, everybody was taught, most people taught, you believe in the police. The police is there to serve you, not in Birmingham. Because police in Birmingham was synonymous with the Klan. They just didn't wear the robes. If they would shoot a black man down, they would always use what they call throwdown guns, a little 22 that they would have strapped on their ankle or something. And when they shoot the man down, they just put that gun down next to him. And their claim would be, he had a gun, I had to shoot him. That went on over and over again. They wouldn't dare prosecute a white officer, white policeman, for killing a black man on the, again, you have the same things going on now. My mom and dad would always talk to us, and inevitably they would send us next door to my maternal grandmother, my mom's mom. We called her Nanny. And she would try and explain to us what my mom and dad were having difficulty explaining. But she would always talk about how they ended up in Birmingham, and she went to Clark Atlanta University, and she met her husband who was a Morehouse man and all that. I said, Nanny, we didn't ask you that. We want to know, why do they treat black folks so bad? Why is this happening to us? What did we do? And she would always end her lessons to us with her mantra, I call it. She would always say, pray, have faith, walk upright, and get a good education. Boys, if you want to deal with this issue of race, pray, have faith, walk upright, and get a good education. Now, Fred Shuttlesworth was a minister in Birmingham, and people used to think he was crazy because he would always try and enroll his daughter in the Phillips High School. They would never bother the daughter, but they beat him up. The Klan would be there. They wouldn't be in their robes and stuff. They'd be in street clothes, but the police would stand by and let them beat him for about 10, 15 minutes. I mean, just beat him up, a man of the cloth, a minister, servant of God. And then finally they leave him alone and they patch him up, they drive him off, the ambulance would come and get him, and he would be right back out there the next day demonstrating and trying to do something to make things better in Birmingham. He called Dr. King and asked him to come to Birmingham. Because by that time, Dr. King, if you remember, the church that he was at initially was Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, right in the sites of the state capitol in Montgomery, Alabama. That's where Rosa Parks was. And so he had received national acclaim for dealing with Rosa Parks, getting her bailed out of jail and getting the community involved. And it resulted in the Southern Christian Leadership Council. Dr. King reluctantly came to Birmingham, but Fred Shuttlesworth begged him to come. And so he was a veteran civil rights leader, but he brought with him James Bevel and Wyatt T. Walker. You saw him when he was trying to vote, and they was beating him up. Joe Lyra was another one that he brought with him. Ralph Abernathy. Many of the luminaries that you've seen over the years in the civil rights movement were right there in Birmingham with him. Now, he was a student of nonviolent resistance, and he needed a place to train people on what that was about. The church that I grew up in, 16th Street Baptist Church, was right on the outskirts of downtown Birmingham, or the Central Business District. If you go there now, you will see 16th Street Church. Across the street, you will see the Civil Rights Institute. And then across the other street, you will see Kelly Ingram Park, where most of the demonstrating took place. Now, they needed a place that was convenient to downtown Birmingham. They needed a place that could hold the many people that came to be trained in nonviolent resistance. Because the way that worked is he would teach them all of the civil rights songs. I ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, those songs. Or We Shall Overcome, you've heard them. But he would also talk about dealing with the violence that he knew that would be perpetrated on them when they went to demonstrate. You would be spat upon, assaulted, hit, name calling. It didn't matter whether you were female, you saw the brutality. They would beat you up, billy clubs, all of that was going on. And he explained to the people who came to demonstrate, if you got guns and knives, go home, because we can't use you. The first incident involving a weapon, it'll ruin everything. And so you got to make up in your mind, this is something that you want to do. You got to go by the rules. So his first round was dealing with adults. And so typically the adults would come home from work, go down to 16th Street Church. They would hear a resounding message by Dr. King, again, his oratory genius and intellectual depth. I used to love to hear him. And the first round, they would lock up the adults, where it posed a couple of problems. The first problem was, if mom and dad were locked up, who at home watching the babies? The other one was, whenever they were released and attempted to go back to their jobs, if they had jobs, their employer would say, we know where you've been. Down there fooling with King and Shuttlesworth, and you don't have a job anymore. There was a lot of frustration. And I was hearing bits and pieces of it. They even came up with a rule that said that they tried to outlaw the NAACP. And they were trying to get the list of names of people who were members and stuff. And I remember hearing my parents talk about it. Finally, they got together and decided that they would use kids to do the demonstrating. Dr. King really didn't want that to happen. He knew that if a child was injured or killed or something, they would blame it on him. And he went back and forth with this, but finally they said, let's do it. And again, I begged my mom and dad to let me go, but they said no. I said, but Mom, we got friends, Miss Robusky, Freeman Robusky, he went. But she said no. Well, during the time when I grew up, you knew when to shut up. So we watched it on TV. We prayed with our friends. We heard the stories of what happened to them when they went to demonstrate and then go to jail. And then the other part of it, Al and Derek King, they were A.D. King's brothers' kids. They were our best friends. And we heard about the movement directly from them. I remember being over to their house and we were doing like little boys do, making noise and stuff and running around and stuff. And Mrs. King said, look, guys, y'all gonna take that noise out of here because Uncle Mel is in there trying to get some rest. I said, wait a minute. Do you mean to tell me that Dr. King's on the other side of this door? I said, yes. I said, can I go look at him? No, don't bother doing that. You know, I thought about it. I said, well, if I did it, I wouldn't be invited over here anymore. And I knew it was going to happen once my folks heard about it. You know, imagine that. So I made the conscious decision to back off. But I wanted to go see that man because I'd seen him on TV. I'd seen him in Evidence magazine and Jet and Life and Look. I'd seen all of that. And I just wanted to shake his hand because I felt at the time, even as a 10-year-old, he was the bravest man on earth. So kids started going to the demonstration. I would go to school and something would happen and the classrooms went empty. The word is that he used to go down on the corner in front of my high school, Parker High School. I was in grade school, and just give the signal. Kids were coming over the fence. And everybody would go downtown Birmingham, go into 16th Street Church. And the problem was that 16th Street Church had opened its doors for that to happen. There had been bombings all over town, churches, prominent homes and stuff. And there have been bombings at several other churches around town, but never while it was occupied. That would soon change. The demonstrations continued and continued, and the guys who lived behind me, their dad was a barber. He was self-employed, so he had to worry about getting fired if his kids got locked up. And so Floyd and James and Dwight Armstrong, their backyard was separated from my backyard by an alley. We were the same age, same size. And their address was 208 9th Court West. Mine was 208 9th Avenue West. And the FBI came and talked to my parents and said, you need to keep an eye on your kids because if the Klan came looking for them and saw your boys, they could easily get them confused. And whatever they came to do, they had to do it quick and get out of that neighborhood. So be careful. Imagine a parent telling the kids, you can't even play in your own backyard. You can't go down the street. It was limited to where you can ride your bicycle. So the demonstrations continued and continued. Kids got locked up. When the jails were filled, they ended up taking some of them out to the state fairgrounds and placing them in facilities designed for livestock. Imagine that, pig pens. Incarcerating kids. And then it got so bad that at the end of the year, they refused to allow Black schools to have proms. There was a group of people that went back to Parker High School not too long ago and had their prom because they couldn't do it 50, 60 years ago. They were trying to do everything they can to intimidate and frustrate the people of Birmingham, from kids all up to grandma and grandpa. At one point, Dr. King went out and he joined in the demonstrations and he was placed in jail himself. He was locked up in solitary confinement. And then I think Reverend Abernathy was locked up, and Shuttlesworth. They weren't too far away, but they were in separate cells. Again, that was used to intimidate them. And the ministers, the white ministers in Birmingham, don't miss this, they took out a full-page ad in the Birmingham News, and it said, Dr. King, we know why you're here. We agree with you. We would like to work with you. We're about to change the governments in Birmingham. They had something like a county commissioner form of government, but they changed to a mayor council form. And they were thinking things would change after that. But Dr. King read their statement because one of his co-workers slipped it in to him while he was in jail. And he read it, and that led to the famous A Letter from a Birmingham Jail. Please read it. Please examine it, because that led to his book, Why We Can't Wait. But in a nutshell, it said, you know, to wait always means never. We can't afford to stop the movement. Do we have momentum now? We have to continue to do this. And so again, A Letter from a Birmingham Jail. It's a must-see. Dr. King stayed in jail for about 20 days, and they finally let him out. And they met with some of the folk downtown, and some of the city council folk, Chamber of Commerce, and they did just a few things. They took down some of the signs, colored water fountains. They offered jobs to some people to allow them to work as clerks and sell in the department stores rather than just clean up and clean toilets and stuff. Just a few things, some baby steps, but that was progress because that went all over the Black community. Everybody was just happy to see that happening. Everybody wanted to know who's working that position, who's working that burger. We wanted to go there and shop because we wanted our friends, the people that we knew, to wait on us. Even those little bitty steps, they turned around and did something in order to teach people that the Klan was still in control. One Sunday morning, my brother and I woke up. Normally, we'd be getting ready to go to Sunday school. We would normally smell the coffee and the pancakes and stuff that my mom would cook. This Sunday, no such thing. We could hear people in the house. We could see people in the house that shouldn't have been there. My brother and I were terrified. We hadn't seen our parents. At one point, tall white guy came to our bedroom door and just stood there. And we saw the gun on his side. He had on a pair of blue jeans, plaid shirt. He didn't say anything. He just looked around. And my brother was a mess. We didn't know what to do. I think he jumped out of his bed and got in bed with me. We just didn't know what to do. And then finally, my mom walked in. And she said, I guess y'all wondering who these people are in the house. She said, yeah. Yes, ma'am. Who are these folks? She said, it's the police, the FBI, and the media. And they in there talking to your dad. I said, well, what they want with him? And she said, last night after y'all went to sleep, they bombed the A.G. Gaston Motel. That's right up the street from 16th Street Baptist Church. And my dad worked there, had a part-time job. He worked for the federal government as a clerk Monday through Friday, but in the evenings and weekends, he managed the A.G. Gaston Motel, which was basically the best place and the only place that you could stay while you were there. As a matter of fact, the journalists from across the world stayed at the A.G. Gaston Motel because they weren't welcomed at the other hotels and motels. And if they chose to try, they just take their equipment and tear it up because they didn't want the word to get out. See, because it was an economic thing. If you showed the world how bad things are and how bad they treat Black folks and stuff you saw in the film, who would like to see that? Who would consider coming to Birmingham or Selma or Montgomery with those type of images? Another thing that Dr. King did, he was very, very sharp when it came to manipulating and using the media. Those the rallies at 16th Street Church would take place at say 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning, and the kids would leave, headed towards the courthouse, and all they wanted to do was go to the courthouse, kneel down, and pray. But they wouldn't make it there. They would go to Kelly Ingram Park, where the police would be waiting on them with the dogs and eventually fire hoses. Imagine a little kid getting hit with a cannon of water, being thrown across 10 feet in the air, and then get locked up and go to jail soaking wet. That's what was going on in Birmingham. But Dr. King made sure that those images went out across the world. And back during those times, for some reason, my mom and dad watched the Huntley Brinkley Report. One of them was in Washington, the other one was in New York. and they would go back and forth. But those were the two anchors who gave the accurate story about what was going on, because you were hearing ridiculous stuff about what was going on in Birmingham, and they even claimed that people in Birmingham, black folk, blowing up their own houses to receive sympathy. That was in the, let's see, I think it was June 11th and 12th. A little bit around the same time, Medgar Evers was killed in his front yard in Jackson, Mississippi. Fast forward to August 25th was the March on Washington. All of these people, 250,000 people met in the mall in Washington, D.C. Not one bit of violence. And if you really want to look at it another way, during the quote-unquote insurrection, everybody would bring attention to the March on Washington and say, yeah, 250,000 people there protesting. No violence. No tearing up stuff. That's where Dr. King delivered his famous I Have a Dream speech. That was the 27th of August. September 4th came around. Schools in Birmingham were integrated. Several of my friends integrated the schools, including the Armstrong brothers who lived behind me. Check this. The FBI sat in the alley between our backyard and their backyard for 2 years to protect their families. We used to laugh about it and say, you know, we're the most protected people in the whole world because the FBI was there. But not only that, they would have to walk the boys to school at Greenmount Elementary School, right down the street. They would walk them to school, sit in the classroom with them for a number of years and walk them home just to protect them from what could have happened to them. That's how bad it was in Birmingham. That was September 4th. September 15th rolled around, Sunday morning. My mother dropped Ken and I, my brother and I, off at Sunday school. Now, normally she would go to her class too, but she was a school teacher and her lesson plans were due the next day. And so many school teachers went to 16th Street Church, but a lot of them did the same thing. They dropped the kids off, went back home to finish their work because they had to turn it in the next day. My mom didn't worry about us having a way home. We knew everybody there. We catch a ride and, you know, it was a nice day. We walk home. So she dropped us off. And normally the adults had Sunday school up in the main sanctuary. Some of them were up in the balcony, but the kids were downstairs in the basement in what we call the lower auditorium. It was Youth Day this particular Sunday, and the theme for Youth Day was the love that forgives. This was when kids took over the service. We did everything but the sermon. Kids took over the choir. I played in the orchestra. We took up collection. There was somebody to read the scripture. The little that we know, we would never get a chance to celebrate that event. My class, as you saw in the film, met in the church library, full of books. And there was a glass bookcase that was floor to ceiling, packed with books that had a glass front. Not compressed wood, real wood, heavy, right? And Sunday school was over. Our Sunday school teacher, Mr. Greer, had gone up to the main sanctuary to get ready for church service. He was a deacon. And he left us down in the basement in the library. We were talking about who was going to have the best football game, who's going to have the best football team. It was one of us who was in the band at Ullman High School. We were talking about his experiences in the band because we looked forward to that. We were right there. I was in the 7th grade, 8th grade, and then I was going to high school. We wanted to know all about what he was experiencing. Meanwhile, somebody sent 16th Street Church a box of American flags, and we found them in the library. And we were in the midst of passing them out to each other, and then the building started to shake. The lights went out, dust everywhere. That bookcase that I described was reeling back and forth. And had it fallen over on one of us or several of us, it would have killed us, really. It was so loud that I honestly could tell you I never heard it, but you could see the results of it. And I didn't really know what that was. Nobody knew what was going on. I remember running out of the library into the open space and they had folding chairs. You couldn't see where you were going. Everybody was running. You could hear people screaming and you were bumping into people. But the worst was when you ran into one of those chairs because it really put some damage on your shins. I looked around and I saw a red light coming down the stairwell from the staircase that I used to get in there. And I knew that was the way out. So I ran toward those steps. And before I could get halfway up, police was standing there. Now, if you call the police right now, it'd take them good 7 minutes to get here. 60 years later, with fast cars and computers. So the police had to know that was happening because they were right there while the building was still shaking. I attempted to run past him, and he had stretched his arms across the railing there, and he said, "Nigga, get back down in there." Again, I didn't know what was going on, but I felt it was something going on. I didn't need to obey him that day. So I ran right on his arms and kept going. I went out to the curb there, 6th Avenue and 16th Street, and there was an eerie calm. I could see pigeons flying from the high points of that church, and it was an overcast day, but then it caught me. The pungent odor of gunpowder. And I guess you wondering, well, you 11 years old, what you know about gunpowder? Cap pistols. Firecrackers that everybody played with, wasn't supposed to, but I knew the odor. And I realized they bombed the church. Pretty soon people started to come down the stairs. You've seen the church, that huge stairwell, and some people were being helped down. Many were bleeding. All of them were crying. People were looking for their loved ones. And then it dawned on me I hadn't seen my brother, Kenneth. So I attempted to go back into the basement. And I ran into a fireman. He said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going looking for my brother." "That okay?" He said, "Go right ahead." Now, you don't let a kid back into a church that's just been bombed. You don't know whether there's a second bomb, a third bomb, or as a result of the first bomb, the whole place would collapse. I went to my brother's classroom and I looked all under the tables. Again, no lights, dust, dark. Yelled for him. Nobody was there. I came out empty-handed. I mentioned earlier that I was supposed to play in the church orchestra, and I saw my clarinet sitting there, so I grabbed it and walked out, kept looking, and finally found him. He was there with his Sunday school teacher, Miss McCall, my grandmother's best friend, and she seemed real happy to see me because she sort of assumed responsibility for both of us since she was Nanny's best friend. And I told her, I said, "I can take care of Ken. My dad's up the street at the AG Gas Motel. They had rebuilt it from the bombing that they had 2 months earlier. And I'm sure he'll be here pretty quick." And I grabbed him by the hand and I did my best as an older brother to make sure he was okay. He was a mess. And we stood there on that same corner, and then finally I could see my dad running down the street. I had never seen that man run in my life, but he was running that day with this crazy look on his face. When he got to the corner, the police tried to deny him from going across the street, probably the same one trying to keep me in the basement. He didn't even wait for an answer. He defied and ran straight across the street, and he hugged us like he had never done before. He kept asking, "Boys, are you all right? Are you hurt? Let me look at you. Let me look at your eyes. He was just, I'd never seen him like that." So again, at this point, if you do the math, everybody in the Long family, he got a little of the dynamiting in June, and then 2 boys in September. Mom was the only one that escaped it. He took us down to the AG Gas Motel where there was mass pandemonium. The reporters were fighting over 2 payphones in the lobby, that small lobby, trying to report back to wherever they were from of what was going on in Birmingham in the bombing of the church. People were everywhere, and he took us into his office space, and he made my brother take his shirt off to make sure he was okay. He was on the phone trying to call home and tell my mom that he found us and we were okay, but the line was busy. There was no call waiting and none of that back then. And he was so frustrated because he kept saying it would seem to me when she wouldn't be on the phone because it wouldn't make any sense to call the church and call next door to my grandmother and aunt. And again, their line was busy. Because by this time, the word had gotten out and people all over the country were calling because they knew we went to church there. When they got off of the phone, my dad was so happy. And he told Mom, he said, "Look, I found the boys. They are all right. They're in my office. You can come and get them." And what should have taken about 10 minutes for her to get there took about 25, 30 minutes. And she pulled into that breezeway. If you've seen the pictures of the AG Gas Motel, and she jumped out of that car, I think, before she put it in park good. And you could tell she had been crying. Her face was just wet with tears. And she hugged us Unbelievable. And I was thinking about all my other friends who were there because, see, there was no, now when they have mass shootings, they have places designated for kids to go and the parents to go pick them up. No such thing. My mom drove home, got us home. My grandmother was in the front yard. My Aunt Ruth and grandmother waiting on us. And they had us to talk about our experience that we had just explained to my dad and mom. And we were in tears because what we experienced, that it was not right for young folks. And we kept saying, Nanny, why would they do this to folks at church? What's the difference between black churches and white churches? Ain't but one Bible. Of course, she struggled with that. She said there are good people that's black, good people that's white, bad people that's black, and bad people that's white too. They all over the place. But we say, look, bad things seemingly happen to us all of the time. What's up with this? Struggle, and she struggled, and then she said it again. Boys, if you want to overcome what you just experienced, pray, have faith, walk upright, get a good education. That was her mantra, and she hugged us. Later on that day, we found out that 27 people were injured. And 4 beautiful girls, Denise, Addie, Cynthia, and Carol. 4. The 5th girl was there, Sarah's sister, and she's blind in one eye. Following week was spent visiting grieving families. Carol's funeral was Tuesday at St. John Baptist Church right around the corner from our church. And Dr. King wanted to have a mass funeral, but by the time he made his way over to Carol Robinson's house, her mother, dad had already decided that's what they were going to do, and they weren't changing. These Cynthia and Addie, their funeral was at 6th Avenue Baptist Church on the other side of town. If you go there now, the University of Alabama, Birmingham is in that site. And it was too many people to get into the church, but I can't remember how I got over there. I can't seemingly remember, because I should have been in school. But I was standing there outside of the church because I could hear Dr. King's melodious oratory genius and intellectual depth over the PA system as he eulogized those girls. You can go back and read that eulogy also. And then finally, I saw something that was just took me, it swept me away. I saw the pallbearers bring out 3 coffins, load them in the 3 hearse that was standing there. Then there was Dr. King. I've never seen the man in person. He was leading the recessional, followed by Reverend Abernathy and Shuttlesworth and Reverend Lowry and all of the lieutenants of the movement. That he was standing there. He had this strange look on his face, and I didn't really know what to do. I just wanted to walk up and hug him, but I figured that's the wrong thing to do. It looked like every time I looked away and turned and looked around, he was looking straight at me. It was too powerful for me to absorb it. What was going on? We were 10 feet away. I never will forget, that was the most powerful moment in my entire existence. I'm 70 years old. I never experienced anything like that. I call that my epiphany experience. The experience that you have when you know that you know that you know that you know. I had no idea. And when I went home and I told my grandmother about looking at Dr. King and peering into his eyes, told me once again, she said, pray, have faith, walk upright, get a good education. But she added something. She said, added Denise, Cynthia, and Carol didn't get a chance to live their lives out. You got to do your part to humanity. That's true. You need to find something to be of significant value. That's why I'm here today. I really didn't understand what she was saying. I was 11 years old, and all of this stuff was happening fast. And again, there was no counseling for black boys and girls. We were at school like nothing happened, trying to struggle and get that education that she talked about. 10 years later, that clarinet case came into play. The one that I left in the church the first time and went back and got it on the second time, because I ended up going to Texas Southern University to play in the band and using that same clarinet. I knew that Dr. King was a fraternity man. He was a member of Alpha Phi Alpha, and that's what I knew that I wanted to be too. So I kept looking around the campus for the signs and stuff, and I went to the meetings and scared to death. And a year later, I became a member of that fraternity. The very first meeting that I went to, one of the brothers from law school shouldn't have even been at our meeting. But he came to our meeting. He was an Alpha too, but he should have been gone. He was law school, but he came and told us about Big Brothers, Big Sisters, the mentoring program. I heard about it, but I never knew about it that was a big or little. And I did some research to find out that Big Brothers, Big Sisters wasn't even organized in Birmingham until 1972. So this is 1971. And the reason why it wasn't organized was because of what? Segregation. Because that would have been too difficult to manage in Birmingham during the 50s, 60s, and now 70s. And I made a promise to him that I would look into that. Now, I wouldn't dare try to do it while I was in school. I didn't have a car. And if I had 15 bucks in my pocket, I was rich. And I was in band and football games and stuff. And I was occupied by being a college man. But I said, I'll look into it as soon as I got out of school. My first job out of Texas Southern, I graduated in 74. I had a girlfriend, now my wife of almost 50 years. She wanted commencement one day and matrimony the next. It wasn't funny to me. I figured out, I said, I lived at home with mom and dad. Till I was 18, came, lived in the dormitory. And then once I got out of school, I had a roommate for a while. I sure don't want to be just locked down by somebody else's rules. But I wanted to marry that girl, and I eventually did. My first job was working for NASA on the space shuttle program. I was seated at my desk the very first day. The first time being around white people. I went to all black everything, elementary school, high school, and then Texas. So I had one white teacher, taught algebra. I loved her to death. But I struggled with algebra. She got me out of there. But I was sitting at my desk, and a black guy who worked there came by, welcomed me to the company, introduced himself, and before he walked away, he said, "Hey, Dale, you ever thought about being a big brother?" I said, "Man, there you go." And so he signed me up, and they had a program in Birmingham where you do it for one day. But to get accustomed to it, they called it Big for a Day. And they took the kids who were unassigned, that was it, waiting on a mentor. They matched them with people like me who's thinking about it. I didn't know I was thinking about it, but I guess Bill thought I was. And I made the arrangements, and I called them on like I was supposed to, introduce myself and said I'd be by Saturday. They had given me tickets to take them to the Astros baseball game down in Houston, the Astrodome. Now, the dome wasn't no big deal to me because Texas Southern played a couple of football games there, so it was no big deal. But that blow ball was thrilled. Now, they made one drastic mistake. They told me I could get as many tickets as I wanted to the game, so I got 3. One for me, one for the little boy, one for a date. But see, I had a plan. I was going to impress this young lady. See what great guy I am. And I spent all of my time dealing with the young lady. Wasn't paying that little boy no attention because I didn't have the value of the training that I would get once I signed up. He would pull on me, and I said, okay. And then finally, at the end of the game, he said, "Mr. Long, you're going to be my big brother forever." So that was my opportunity. This came to me. I didn't look for it. That boy came to me. And I knew that was something that I had to do. Because I later found out that he was adopted. Then his adopted parents got a divorce. That means he'd been rejected twice. Here he is petitioning me to be there for him. So I signed up. Had a great time. I would take him to Texas Southern football games because after I graduated, for the first time, I didn't have to go to a football game with a band uniform on. But I would figure my way out on the field and stuff, and I'd take him out there with me, and all of the major wrestlers would make a big fuss over him. And then finally, when Ellen and I got married, not to the lady I took to the game, but when Ellen and I got married, he was in our wedding because he was one of the fellas. Everybody knew him. So I did that one time, that one experience that I started in 1974 with him. And I've done it ever since, almost 50 years now. Brother number 8. I've been there for them, trying to make sure that they grew up to end up going to a fine institution like this, or Texas Southern. I'll tell you this and I'll take my seat. One little brother, Montel, we went to pick him up, and Ellen and I, my wife and I, we were mentors as a couple. So really it was my job, but she would come when she got ready. We were going to, but I missed doing this earlier. I thought the only Cowboys were in Dallas. But we were going to the Dallas Cowboys game, and my wife had never been in what we call Jerry's World, that stadium. And we went by and picked up Montel, and we thought he'd be thrilled to go to the game and all excited. But he said to me, he said, Dale, have you heard about Trayvon Martin? That's the little boy that got killed down in Florida by a vigilante. And the story goes that he had a can of tea and some candy in his pocket. And this guy decided that, and he had on a hood. And I guess this guy decided that he wasn't the right person in the neighborhood to kill him. Little boy, 8, 9 years old. Montel asked me, and again, we're going to the Cowboys game. I thought that he would be preoccupied with this. He said, I knew that was the time where I had to put my big boy pants on, try and give him a reasonable response that wouldn't frighten him, but yet to cause him to be cautious. And I told him, I said, man, if you ever found yourself someplace and you weren't quite comfortable, call me, I'll come get you if you can't find your mom. I said, sometimes you gotta keep your distance from people that you don't know. You gotta be careful about the hoodies, because some people don't like them, and they see them as signs of intimidation. I know that's the fad, that's what young folks do. And I struggled, but I was trying to answer him, but I didn't want to teach hate, because he was devastated by what he had seen. With that situation, pray, have faith, walk upright, and get a good education. We got questions, right? This is the fun part. And forgive me for getting emotional, but I'm sorry. But if you have questions, I'm here to answer them. Anybody? Probably that 16th Street Church, because it took them a year to rebuild that church, but it came back stronger than it was originally. there was a lot of tension paid upon that church. But the incident of the bombing had a profound effect on me because my maternal grandfather was a minister. And all of the deacons would always bug me to join church, be like your granddad. But I used to ask my grandmother, I listened to them. She said when the time came. So 2 Sundays after the bombing, opened the doors of the church. We were down at the LR Hall auditorium that Dr. A.G. Gasson owned. We were there for a year. I went down and gave my life to Christ and joined the church. I think to answer your question, it was because my friends are all over the place. So, Doc didn't tell you, but I do yoga. The whole room for the white women. and you know, when they begged me to come to the class, I was terrified. And this was just 10 years ago. And then when I started doing it, I said, you know, man. But some of those ladies in that class are best buddies now. They know where I am right now. They're itching to find out about my experience here. I got a lot to tell them. Any other questions? Did that answer your question, man?
Yes, I have.
Okay, okay. Offers.
Right, like
all the time.
all the time.
All the time. And I got friends, and I'm sometimes I avoid answering questions like that. I got friends that make sense. It affected them psychologically. One of my friends wrote a book, one of many books out about 16th Street Church and about that era in our American history. Somebody asked you what you listen to today, tell them they're long talking about American history. But she mentioned in her book that her brother Kurt was years later, trauma that he experienced with the bombing. Some people that I know never set foot in that church again. I went back to file a black. I read about it. I went to his trial, and I was expecting the courtroom to be filled with some of my friends from back then. Mrs. Parkinson was there. That's where they're all deceased now. I didn't go back because of hatred. They eventually locked up the 4 guys that they originally charged them almost the next day. But if you know the history, J. Edgar Hoover closed the investigation. He knew who done it. But 2 politicians trying to get elected to the Attorney General or something, and they took over the investigation. They reopened it, and then they were tried. But guess what? 40 years later. Remember earlier when we talked about why we can't wait? Sometimes justice denied, justice delayed, is justice. So you know, it's a pleasure for me to be here, Chef. And I just ask that you go out and tell people about it. Heard it from someone who was there, a survivor. And it didn't create bitterness within me. Because I've spent a lifetime mentoring young folk. Tell them, my dad would have been a big brother too if all the good kids wanted to do this, but that's all he was going to do. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. You know, it was fun for me because I always chose stuff to do that was fun. We went fishing, we went to games. And if you're a big brother, you got good seats. I'm talking about up in nosebleed. Good seats. And so we would have tickets to the Mavericks right under the goal. And I called the aerial basketball game to Montana, return to the. My phone was blowing up. Boy, how you get some tickets way down there? Sideline tickets. One time at one point, I was assigned a little boy who was a special needs kid. And I said, they must want me to quit because he was not easy. I struggled with he had autism or something else. After the first few months, I figured this ain't working. I was thinking about giving it up. Took him to the Big Brothers Big Sisters annual picnic. That just wasn't good for him. Because kids out there, they had dogs, he was terrified. Then when we went inside to eat, I call them baby's kids, they had balloons all over the eating room, and the kids were climbing up there, getting the balloons, popping them, and he could cover his ears up because he couldn't stand the noise. And I'm learning all of this stuff. What's up with that? His mother wasn't helping me. I talked to his teachers. I read as much as I could. I was having difficulty dealing with it. I met a gentleman at the picnic. I didn't know him, but he walked up to me and introduced him. Later found out that he was on the national. He said, Dale, do you have a business card? And I gave him my card. Hold on to your card. I was getting ready to quit. I knew that my 6 months review was coming up because I figured, because that little boy did some other stuff I won't talk about. But it wasn't working for me. I called my brother who was in Birmingham. He was dealing with issues too because he was a diabetic, double amputee, and he was struggling to stay alive. He was on dialysis. And I said, hey man, I'm in the worst trouble I ever been in my life. He said, you in trouble? I ain't got no feet, boy. Y'all can laugh at you, but that's the way we did. And I told him my story. I said, I got this little boy that I've been really special. I don't want to give up on him. And I said, I've done everything I can think of. Check this out. He said, have you prayed about it? I haven't done that. But I will, because I knew my review was coming up. So before I left work, one of the ladies handed me an envelope that looked like an invitation to something I couldn't afford to go to. So I threw it in my briefcase, and when I was driving home, I was sitting there at the light, Greenville Avenue, and I opened my briefcase, I took out that invitation, I opened it up, and it wasn't an invitation. It was a handwritten note, and it was from the guy who I met at the picnic. And the note said, Dale, I've heard a lot of great things about you in this program. You have a very difficult match. Anybody can be successful, and you can. You ever prayed for something and you got an answer and you knew that was the answer? That's what happened to me. I wasn't there. I decided whatever that little boy did, I dealt with it. Because I had to be there for him because he didn't ask to come where he was. It was up to me. It was a challenge, but it was a challenge that I accepted. How about in the film, you heard them say that the two boys were killed by the Klan. No, that's not the truth. The police shot one of them for throwing rocks. See, the people were demonstrating all over Birmingham after the bombing. And then the second boy was killed by a white Eagle Scout. Shot him in the back of the head, the boy goes by, so they never prosecuted either one of them. They shot down in cold blood. Ladies and gentlemen, let's not relive those years. Whatever you can. That includes voting, that including getting involved, and sometimes running for office. That's what it's going to take to get this done. Any other questions? Yes, sir. But what? My way was with music, gospel music. That was soothing to me. I listen to it at night. I listen to it while I exercise. I still do it. You see me? Yeah. Listen to music. I listen to gospel music. I listen to jazz music too, because that's ours. And asking Mr. Long, out there, man. didn't let that stop us. As soon as that church was built, we were right back at serving the community. I was in the first group of kids to get baptized. And I joined church the second week. And so I was in the first group to get baptized. But that church thrived. We serving the community, feeding the hungry, dealing nowadays with homeless situations. But we had money from all over the world. And one of the significant part of that is that the whales cut glass thing. It's a picture of Jesus. Artwork that people really couldn't understand. It's still there in the process of getting it redone now. But many of the people who were at 16th Street Church, many of them were gone on. I was there for the 50th anniversary. There were about 20 of us that met with them and prayed and celebrated each other. And we talked about the same thing that I talked about today. And then I hope to be there September 15th, commemorate the lives of those girls because it will be the 60th. But I think to go back and not let the lives of those girls be wasted and you forget about it. They gave of themselves. I only gave them a few hours of volunteerism. I get involved in campaigns. I serve on city government doing stuff. I worked for the city of Dallas for 20 years. And before that, I was with Darden. And before then, GI and early with NASA. But the best part of it is telling young people, you too can. If it's something as simple as teaching them how to tie a tie. Imagine that. Little boy never put on a tie, but he know how to tie these. They ain't easy to do. So give it back. Look what your question is. We'll talk about
it. Very impactful.
Thank you. If you got questions that you had thought of, you can email me. I can give you my address. Hey, it's more food, y'all.